That's what I was hoping you would say. So, thank you for the introduction, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm not actually in the Black Country right now. I'm just next door in Birmingham. Uh, a modern definition of the Black Country that we generally stick to at the Black Country Living Museum is that it's the four boroughs of Wolverhampton, Walsall, Sandwell, and Dudley. But I don't think I'll go any further on that because I know it's a sensitive subject area, the boundaries of the Black Country, and they're subject to change, whoever you speak to at any one time. So for that, the presentation tonight, it's mainly will be on the Birmingham Canal navigations. So Martin introduced me, and yeah, I have worked for British Waterways and the Canal River Trust for many years. And a few years ago, in 2018, I was lucky to embark on a PhD on the brickmaking industry of the Black Country. It's a collaborative PhD with the Black Country Living Museum, which means that I also provide advice to them on a project called Forging Ahead, which is the construction of a 1940s to 1960s street, as well as an industrial area, which includes a replica brickworks. Unfortunately, not a working brickworks, but one where if you visit the museum after April, you will be able to have a go at throwing a brick. So that's a bit of background. I'll just move on. So, following 2 centuries of industrial exploitation, the land surface of the Black Country is mainly man-made. Yet, it's important to remember, apart from the canal system established in the second half of the 18th century, there are few physical remains of that date or earlier which are left above ground. So, the 90 or so miles of canals for me and for any historian, archaeologist, and so on, they're the richest source of material evidence of the industrial development in the region. And for me, the network also contains the most significant collection of buildings and structures which were built with brick from this period. So a further 70 miles of canals or canal-related infrastructure once formed part of this intricate network of waterways up to the 1960s. But unfortunately, these were progressively filled in and redeveloped following the creation of the British Transport Commission in 1948. And they set about closing canal networks where they could, they filled them in, they knocked down buildings and so on. But the surviving canals, which meander through the landscape that was once intensively renewed during the 20th century, remain as wonderful evidence of the pressures which were placed on the brickmaking trade during the period between the 1760s through to the 1870s. There is very limited research on early brickmaking in the Black Country, particularly before the development of the canal network. So by looking at the construction of canals, it has been possible to understand how brickmaking was done before it became an industrialized process undertaken at a brickworks and later on in factories. So the development of the canals in the Black Country, the impact on local brickmaking between 1766 to 1870 was immense. And so this is what the talk will focus on. And initially, we will look at the pioneering phase of canal construction between 1760 to 1780. And then I'll discuss the development of the permanent brickyard and the changes on the type of bricks which were used on canals over time. And then finally, I'll end the talk by looking at canal carrying, in particular, looking at the carriage of bricks on canals. So with regards to sources, I've looked at historic maps, canal company minutes, contemporary literature of the time, particularly newspapers, canal deeds, canal acts, and first and foremost, canals and their associated structures, which are all around us. So that's been the biggest source for me to look at. The Canal Company minute books are held at the National Archives, local archives, and the National Waterways Archives, Ellesmere Port, as well. There's a substantial collection of them at Staffordshire Record Office, unfortunately, which is currently closed. A rich source of primary material comes from newspapers, particularly advertisements. Many of the canal companies use the local press to invite tenders from brickmakers to supply bricks for specific sections of canals, and these opened up various avenues of research for me. And it is these extracts which reveal a great deal about the opportunities for brickmakers at the time, and also what was required of them. For example, the quantity of bricks needed is often listed in these advertisements, as is the location to where the bricks needed to be made or delivered. Relevant newspapers of the time and periodicals include the Wolverhampton Chronicle, Aris's Birmingham Gazette, the Staffordshire Advertiser, and the Gentleman's Magazine, which also includes maps of canals. So they've all been very useful for me. So to talk about early canals in the Black Country, in January 1767, James Brindley was asked to prepare a plan for the Birmingham Canal. And he was asked to look at estimates for a route from a connection with the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, which he had already started working on in Aldersley in Wolverhampton, and through the coal works of Wednesbury, Sandwell, and terminating in Birmingham. And this canal was authorised in 1768. And the scheme took the canal 22.5 miles through a flight of 20 locks in Wolverhampton, and then through another climb in Smethwick through 3 locks, and then a gradual descent into Birmingham through another 6 locks. Brick was the material for all the associated canal structures along the route. And so I've considered, well, whose was the responsibility for brickmaking? Who had these roles and responsibilities? And the canal minutes are great because they tell you a lot of this. So although Brindley acted as a consulting engineer on both the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal and the Birmingham Canal, the actual construction of the canal was the responsibility of a local team. So the canal company, they appointed a team which was led by a resident engineer or clerk of works, depending on what you wish to call them. And this person was a multitasker who functioned on the ground, and he dealt with brickmakers directly on site. And the clerk of works also had a team of men working beneath him, dealing with issues along the proposed line of the canal, and he delegated local tasks to them. These men in particular had to be knowledgeable about management, cutting, masonry, banking, and also what made a good brick. They had a huge amount of responsibility piled onto them, and they had to deal with a barrage of contractors while travelling everywhere by horse. It was a very difficult job. So in February 1768, the Birmingham Canal Committee requested that Mr. William Bentley, who was chair of the committee, seek approval from landowners to discover a good bed of clay. On the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, John Fennyhouse Green was the underclerks of works and assistant to a man called John Baker, a member of the Canal Company Committee for Wolverhampton, and Green wrote his instructions in a day book. And these notes were recorded to ensure that all the works that were undertaken were according to James Brindley's specifications. Green's notebooks are held at Staffordshire Archives. And what they do, they show that he dealt with most of the practical elements of the construction work, including consulting directly with the brickmakers. The Canal Company also appointed a team of administrators who acted as clerks and accountants, and they dealt with the general paperwork generated by the Canal Company committees. And they then arranged advertisements in the local newspapers to select, well, first to appoint brickmakers for the construction purposes. And so this is where the newspapers have come in wonderfully for this project, particularly during lockdown when I couldn't go anywhere. There were nowhere where I could go and do research. So the British Newspaper Archive has just been a wonderful resource for me while I had to do the research during that time. So was a typical advert, and this is in Harris's Gazette in December 1766, when the committee of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal Company invited brickmakers to attend their next meeting at the Red Lion in Wolverhampton. And the brickmakers were requested to make 1,000,000 bricks or upwards, or any considerable part thereof. An advertisement in the Wolverhampton Chronicle dated the 30th of January 1793 requested a brickmaker to make 500,000 or 1,000,000 bricks for the Worley and Essington Canal. And I'd have a think about that. A typical house would have required 100,000 bricks maximum. So brickmakers at the time, they would have been working on housing schemes for richer clients and so on, brick nogging in timber frame buildings. To go from quite a small supply of bricks to suddenly being asked to produce this quantity, it must have, put pressure on the brickmakers at the time. So with regards to contracts, in the Black Country, the canal companies arranged numerous contractors to get the canal built. These contractors were, for example, for the purpose of cutting and excavating the line of the canal, puddling the bottom of the canal, carpentry for lock gates, bridge and tunnel formers. And then there were other contracts for building the locks, the bridges and the aqueducts. And much of this work in the early days was a case of trial and error during the pioneering and early heroic days of canal building, when many elements of canal structures construction was learnt on the job. On the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, for example, much of the earth moving was done by contract, but the construction and the locks and bridges was achieved by direct labour employed by the canal company. So with regards to the clay, clay was excavated in shallow digs close or within the proposed site or line of the canal. It was always manual in these early days, and it was always seasonal. So the clay was dug or won before the 1st of November, stirred up or turned before the 1st of February, and wrought before the 1st of March. There were laws which were enacted in 1729 when it became illegal to fire bricks outside this time frame. I am sure they probably did fire outside this time frame up in the sticks in the Black Country. These laws were probably more in force down in London and so on. For example, Lowcock suggests in Castle Bromwich they did this outside this time zone, when he's found records that 39% were made outside these months during the 1730s to 1750s. During the winter, the dug earth was left to weather and break down with rain and frost, and it was turned over a few times to ensure full exposure. And then the weathered or tempered clay was then thrown into shallow pits and trodden down by humans or horses, ready to be shaped or moulded. And stones or other foreign bodies were removed at this stage. The Canal Acts, they gave the canal companies the power to enter and occupy any land except parks, orchards and gardens. And when the brickmakers had finished at a site, they or the canal company were expected to return the brickmaking site to its original state. The areas where clay was extracted by the brickmakers, called the pit holes, were created in fields as close to the canal where possible. And there are also brick kilns, clamps and hovels for the brickmakers to mould the bricks, and areas for drying the clay. John Greed's notebook from February 1770 captures in specific detail the process of making good the land after brickmaking had taken place. Spectacularly, it states that Mr. Acton had been tasked with blowing up the field at Hazeldene that the brick kilns were in, and that he must have the rubbish there removed and the land levelled for ploughing directly. So they were on it. They were efficient. They moved on and on to their next site, got rid of the brick kilns. They were very much a temporary thing. So the mundane entries in company minutes revealed that there were numerous sites where brickmakers were invited to make bricks on land near to the canal. Each parcel of land had to have a separate agreement as it was not owned by the canal company. And so the canal construction was divided into sections for the convenience of the resident engineer, so that brickmakers moved between these sites to work. And this was to aid the management process, but also because of the linear nature of the canal. On the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, brickmakers were invited to quote to make bricks at several sites, at a place in Compton, north of Wolverhampton, all the way down to South Staffordshire in a place called Priestwood. Because brickmaking was very much seasonal, the brickmaking contracts were established around the seasons when the construction of locks, bridges, and other brick structures were built between April to September. The Birmingham Canal Company instructed a Mr. Shingleton to immediately make contracts with proper persons to make 3 million bricks this season, and that no delay whatever be made or permitted in the execution of the contracts. So they were working to a strict time frame where the weather controlled very much how the canal was built and how the bricks were made. The weather dictated much of the canal engineers' work, as it was a constant theme within the canal company minutes, particularly relating to both brickmaking and bricklaying. Brick and stone structures needed to be built in the mild weather to enable the lime mortar to carbonate over several months before the canal was filled with water. Hence, of course, the seasonal nature of employment. So this would very much encourage itinerant labour, both those that were digging out the canal, but also those who were making brick. And the phrase the itinerant brickmaker runs through the canal company minutes. During the period of clay extraction activity, John Baker ordered John Green to set Baker, a brickmaker, a length of about 100 yards of cutting in Madam Hollyoaks, several holes in the setting out, but found no clay there worth getting. So this gives you an idea that they were constantly walking round or going by horse, looking to try and find good quality clay. And it was a simple case of going out with a shovel and digging. From this, it's evident that the brickmakers were making distinctions about the types of bricks they were producing and categorising them. From the moment the canal route was set out using routerising pegs or stakes, the canal company committee and its engineers were on the lookout for good quality clay suitable for brickmaking. And it was needed to make the bricks, but also to line the bottom of the canal in a process known as puddling, which is still done today. There are a few disparities about clay preparation at the time, and the size of the brick moulds is equally ambiguous at this time. When the clay was ready to use, it is likely that the brickmakers shaped the bricks using standard size moulds typical of the period. I've gone out and measured quite a few bricks from early canal structures and found that they are pretty much a standard size. The surviving pioneering canal companies show that bricks were moulded to a standard size here, as were other elements of the lock, but brick copings, which sit on top of a bridge and so on, they come in all shapes and sizes from this period, which appear on early canal bridges. So in 1766, the Committee of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal Company invited brickmakers to build kilns or clamps. John Green's day books mentions both. So it wasn't a permanent structure and was staked with dried bricks on a clay base and covered with clay or turfs, then fired with coal. The country full of coal, referred to on the route of the Birmingham Canal, provided the fuel to fire the brick clamps. On the Birmingham Canal, the minutes noted that some allowances shall be made to a Mr. Price in the coals he used for burning the bricks contracted for with him. Another brickmaker, Mr. Tomkis, who supplied bricks for the same canal, was also a coal master in Bilston in the Black Country, and his coal extraction enabled him to generate another subsequent industry in brickmaking. And having done some research on Mr. Tomkins, he becomes quite a brickmaker as well as a coal master as time goes on. Uh, the resident engineers and the clerk of works also had to keep a strict account of what was happening on site. And to do this, they passed on the responsibility to overseers or counters. I think this role literally was when the bricks were ready to come out the kiln, the canal companies went out there and counted them to make sure they weren't being ripped off, I guess, by the brickmakers. Uh, Although the records only show the voice of the canal company, they reveal that quality control formed an intrinsic part of brickmaking for the canal companies. John Green notes several problems with bricks coming out of the kiln and Mr. Mansell's works, and suggests that out of 20,000 bricks, 1,000 of them were bad and not worth bringing away. So they were monitoring what was going on. So obviously the very early days of canal construction, they were reliant on roads, which turned into muddy chaos in rainy periods, making the transport of materials such as stone and brick expensive and slow to transport to building sites. So once sections of canals were built, materials could be transported along the canal, but the canal only went so far until more bricks were needed. Cox's analysis of brickmaking for canal companies confirms that there were itinerant brickmakers who supplied canal companies with bricks. John Jackson of Tetnall from Wolverhampton is mentioned in the Leeds and Liverpool Canal Company minutes from 1791. And this Jackson had previously worked on the Stourbridge Canal and agreed to make 500,000 bricks for them. So it's obvious that word probably got around the canal, different canal companies, and brickmakers travelled as far. They probably moved up to Leeds, and then he might have travelled down to London and so on. So these skills were needed, and so they were probably paid a good wage at that time if they were prepared to travel around. So, having done a bit of research, the highest number of brick structures built up to 1860 were canal locks of the narrow type, of which there are 93 locks left in use today just in the Black Country. Each lock required approximately 100,000 bricks, making it a total of 9.3 million bricks to build the locks that remain on the canal network today in the Black Country. The longest lock flight in the area, the Wolverhampton flight of 21 locks on the Birmingham Mainline Canal, required approximately 2.1 million bricks to connect it to the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal at Aldersley Junction, which is this last lock here. This is the bottom lock on the Wolverhampton lock flight. An early accommodation bridge, such as Fox's Lane Bridge on the Birmingham Canal, on Brindley's Canal, required at least 25,000 bricks. But it doesn't accommodate approach walls or waterway walls here. There's only 17 canal bridges that were built during this period are left in the Black Country out of 361 brick bridges. To build these 17 bridges that are left would have required nearly 500,000 bricks. So it's a staggering amount of bricks. You can imagine which were being used. I've got an engineer to help me with these statistics, not being a kind of figures number myself, but there are also many miles of waterway walls between these locks and bridges, requiring 350 bricks per square metre. So up to 1800, just over 80 miles of canals had opened in the Black Country, requiring just over 46 million bricks just for building the towpath side waterway walls alone. The additional infrastructure such as weirs, culverts, tunnels, lockkeepers, hovels, cottages and stables, it must have required a colossal number of bricks. I did a very rough estimate, and you're looking at alone 45 million, million. It just goes on and on. It's just impossible to work out. So this is a map of the Birmingham Canal navigations that was built. Some of these canals have been filled in now, but it's a lovely map to show you that the intensity of the network that got constructed up to 1860. Those estimates I've just mentioned, they were just based on canal structures, but there were a whole new type of building also developed alongside the canal, which would have put huge pressure on the brickmaking trade. Again, warehouses, canal cottages, hovels and mills. Many of these have been lost, particularly in the Black Country, but there are a few wonderful examples. This is one of them. This is the butter and cheese warehouse on the Birmingham Canal near to the railway station. And it's in a terrible state actually, but there are plans to turn it into housing. There have been plans for many years, but hopefully soon it's going to happen, I've been told. Canal cottages, this is a wonderful single-story example with a boundary wall along the canal with a garden in behind that boundary wall. It's a wonderful example. It contained a garden for growing vegetables, and this is again grade 2 listed, but very different types of canal accommodation got constructed on in the Black Country, and fortunately quite a few of it still exists. You've got canal buildings such as this one. This is the bonded warehouse, and that should say Stourbridge, not Stourport, my apologies. These were for transshipment warehouses for storing goods in between transport. Canal side workshop warehouse provided valuable all-season storage, as well as allowing the process of moulding bricks to continue through the year. I imagine there would have been brick warehouses for brick making, although there aren't any left. So in terms of transport, a typical wooden day boat would have carried around 25 tons minimum and loaded up well in excess of 8,000 bricks. So to build a standard narrow lot requiring 100,000 bricks would have required 13 boat trips. So it's likely that brickyards maintained a fleet of boats to fulfill their brick orders over time as the industry developed. This is a typical loading of a canal boat. This is outside a brickworks called E.J. and J. Pearson, who were in the Brierley Hill area of Dudley. This is taken about 1910. So as the industry grew, so did the size of the brickworks as brickyards developed along the line of the canal. Many brickworks had their own sidings and basins, and eventually with the arrival of the railways, they had their own sidings within the railway too, all connected by road, by canal and by railway. The development of the brickyards and the blue brick trade I've found mentions of blue bricks from about 1810 onwards, but the trade really developed hugely from the 1860s onwards, and it completely changed brickmaking in that it became mechanized. Before then, it had mainly been done by hand. There was a few machinery, there were pug mills and so on. But later canals were a product of the changes in the brickmaking trade. For example, this is the Netherton Tunnel portal. The Netherton Tunnel branch, it opened in 1858 to ease congestion on the Dudley Tunnel route. And the tunnel itself is 3,000 yards, and it was built with twin towpaths and gas lighting. It was extremely modern, being one of the last developments on the Birmingham Canal navigations. The engineer for the works was James Walker, who had already built the Tame Valley Canal in 1844, the Russell Canal in 1847, and the Bentley Canal in 1843. So he knew what he was doing. Using the knowledge acquired from building these canals, Walker actually arranged for samples of bricks to be strength tested to ensure that the appropriate bricks were specified to build the 75,000 cubic yards of tunnel. Samples of bricks were taken from different areas in the Black Country: Old Hill, Tibbiedale, Dudley Port, Oldbury. Some of you will know these names, some of you won't. And all of these bricks were crushed until each one burst. And the pressure borne by each brick before crushing varied from 14 tons to 31 tons. So that was equal to an average of 75 tons per square foot of pressure. The tunnel portals were faced with the very best Staffordshire blue bricks, and you can see examples of them here. The coping bricks were a very unusual size. Those on the tunnel portals were 2 feet 3 inches by 1 foot 6 inches in section, and at the time they were believed to be the largest bricks ever made in Staffordshire. Unfortunately, I haven't found the actual brickmaker who made these. I'm on a quest. I do hope one day I'll find who made them. But as you go into the 1860s, makers' marks such as this one, W. Gilbert of Tividale in Tipton, they start to appear on the network. There are various theories why it was introduced. Some would say trademarking, some would just say they were advertising their wares, and they're still around today. So it was a good form of advertising for them. You can see the different variations here. These brick stamps, they tell us an awful lot about the industry. And they tell me a lot that where bricks travelled along the canal, who made them, where they were made. That journey is very important, particularly in when brick stamps first appear. They're also they're wonderful for people to spot. They are people really love finding brick stamps. I've found during my own research, and people collect bricks as well. I found that out a few years, and I've turned into one of those people too. So when we talk about the lives of brickmakers, it's really hard to discover anything about the lives of brickmakers at this point in time, particularly with the early days of canal construction. But a significant example by Mr. Campbell in the London Tradesman provides advice for parents on their children's future careers. And you can see what's said on the slide here. The brickmaker's business is by some not reckoned a very reputable employment, especially to be a journeyman, if they can be called properly be called. So what kind of employment was it? Kingman, who has written a lot about early brickmaking, said it was a innately unadventurous, small scale and seasonal industry. It doesn't sound very exciting, does it? And maybe that's why there weren't so many in the early days of brickmaking. So existing research on early brickmakers is really scarce, and it's difficult to find anything about the lives on the ordinary lives of pre-industrial brickmakers. Brunskill has briefly covers the role of the itinerant brickmaker in some of his text, but actually tracing details of employers and scale of manufacture, it's proved a near impossible task for me in all of this research so far. The most useful source for finding out more about the lives of brickmakers has actually been from factory inspector reports from the 1840s onwards, when I found that children as young as 4 were working in the brickyards with their family, some of who had to make up to 1,500 bricks a day. And these are some of the wonderful photographs of them, dating from about 1910 onwards. The lady in the bottom right of the picture, it is a lady called Nellie Coleman, and she made bricks. I think it was for 64 years. She didn't retire. I think she was told to leave several times and enjoy her retirement, but she couldn't bring herself to it. The photograph in the middle on the right, that's actually taken in 1984. And when you compare it to some of the other pictures, the conditions don't look that different in the 1980s than they did in 1910 and so on. The picture on the top right is the First World War, some ladies who were employed to do brickmaking while the men had been sent to fight. And the bottom left-hand corner is very early on. I think that picture is 1909, and that's ladies filling a kiln somewhere in the Black Country. We don't know where, but it's a very useful photograph to have. And this picture is very important. So the lady on the left is a lady called Sarah Jane Pratt, and she worked as a brickmaker at the Cricket Field Colliery in Brockmore near Brierley Hill, near Dudley. And a member of her family, her great grandson, got in touch and said that he thought I'd be interested in her story, of which I am, obviously. And because it's the Cricket Field brickworks which we've recreated at the Black Country Living Museum. So I was struggling to find any records about brickmakers who had worked there, because many of these records just don't exist anymore. So he got in touch, and he got this very small archive about his great nan. And so we're now able to put together a bit more of a history about the brickworks when she worked there. Her two daughters worked there too during the Second World War. And so we've been able to do a lot more interpretation at the brickworks. And so when it opens, there will be characters, and one of them will be called Sarah Jane Pratt. And it's based on her life and her work as a brickmaker in the 1930s and 1940s. I'm ending on this brick, which is one of my favourite bricks. It was made in Warsaw wood by the Aldridge Brick and Tile Company from the 1930s onwards. These bricks are everywhere in the Midlands. You find them all the time on canals and garden walks, houses and so on. It's really nice to stumble across one of them when you're going for a walk somewhere. They were called Utopia because it was following the First World War into the 1920s and 1930s. There was a real shortage of bricks needed to build houses, particularly council houses, and the Aldridge Brick and Tile Company developed several bricks which appeared to look like a handmade brick with a brindle finish, that bluey red, which was so popular during that period. And they called it the Utopia brick because they were trying to create a new utopia for home owners and tenants across the Midlands, and that was why it was called the Utopia brick. They've ended up all over the place in the West Midlands. I don't know if you'll ever come across any down in Warwickshire. You have to keep an eye out for me. But that's the end of my presentation. So I guess it's question time now for you, and I will stop sharing my screen and get to see you all again.
That's great. And thank you, Elizabeth. You have stopped screen sharing. So, right, Elizabeth has invited questions. Waving at the camera, I'm sure, would be enough. If you want to do the technology and raise an electronic hand, then please do so. But there's got to be a brick expert out there or two.
Yes.
Lead to the question.
Could I ask about the blue bricks, which I think you implied or maybe said were stronger than the ordinary bricks, which I assume are the red?
Yeah.
Now, I was brought up in the Midlands, born in Smethwick, and I'm sure my dad told me that the blue bricks were stronger. And of course, being a kid, I asked why. And I think he said it was fired to a higher temperature, but I'm not sure he really knew the right answer. Do you know why?
Yeah. So he's very right, but there's two factors. Blue bricks are made out of a clay which is called Yttrium marl. It's a different type of clay. It's got different properties from just a common building clay that you would make red bricks. And it can be fired to extremely high temperatures, and it becomes what we call vitrified. And it almost bubbles, it gets so hot. The higher the temperature, the bluer the clay becomes. And then when it's completely fired, that's when it's got its full strength. That's why brindle bricks, which are, you would say, under fired blues, were seen as seconds. However, since then there's been lots of tests done on brindle bricks, which prove they're equally as strong as a blue brick.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. Andy List, you put your hand up, I think.
I did.
Okay.
Very good talk, Elizabeth. My ears pricked up when you mentioned Aldridge and Himley, because my father used to work for Ibstock Brick.
Oh,
Went
wow.
on to own those, and I wondered if you'd come across this book.
I have. It's just down here, actually, on my bookshelf.
My dad was the researcher for it.
No way, really?
Absolutely, yes. He did all the research for it.
Oh, wow. I have to get in touch with you because there's a few questions I've got from that book.
Well, do that, yeah, because I've got the research material for it.
Have you? Oh,
yeah.
I can put you in touch after the meeting.
Thank you.
If you'd like to do that, okay?
Yeah. We were wondering what to do with it, so.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
Great.
I've got somewhere where it could go.
What I've not got, I know how to get.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Well, I'll follow that up.
Thank you.
And make sure you can be in touch with each other. Olwyn, were you coughing, or were you wanting to ask the question earlier? No. Okay. I'll move on. Anyone else? Richard King. Yes, please. You need to unmute, Richard.
My friend.
Okay, you unmute.
You're all right. You're all right now, are we?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Some years ago, 10 years ago, I assisted a former member. You'll all remember Toby Cave. One of his last projects was listing all the brickworks in Warwickshire and the Black Country. I was helping him with the Warwickshire part, but I said to him, "You've got to." We still connected up?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. I said, "I'm not going to help you with the Black Country, but I'll help him with the Warwickshire portion." And I provided him with a lot of information on the Warwickshire section, but and asked and suggested, perhaps a better word, suggested he got a professional researcher to do the Black Country part. I mean, most of the information was obtained from things like directories, newspapers, and so on. But what happened to that information, I don't know. Perhaps, I think Martin will perhaps be aware of what happened to the information.
Yes, I am aware. The material was collected, as you say, and then put on a computer, and then at the time of his death, I think the material disappeared, whether it was thrown away by mistake or not, I don't know, but it is certainly gone. Which is a great pity, but you know, there has been a fair amount of research on Warwickshire brickworks. Can I also say that obviously Staffordshire blues feature heavily on the Warwick canal system. So just down the road at Emscote Road Bridge is a wood and ivory Staffordshire knot coping stones, you know, and they're all over the place. And indeed on railway bridges as well, of course. But and can I say, I was extremely pleased that you mentioned George Wood Braids in Oldbury, one of your marks on the bricks. He is in fact an ancestor of mine, and it is through this connection that my first interest in bricks emerged, and with my younger brother we did a bit of research on that, on the family and on the brickworks itself. So it was great to see it. George Wood braids Oldbury, excellent. Anyway, there we go. I've got that off my chest. Thank you very much. So that was a very interesting talk. But I'll say more later.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any electronic hands raised.
Well,
I'm seeing a physical hand. Peter Stanworth.
Martin.
can you hear me?
Yes.
We can now, Peter.
Yeah, okay. Fascinating talk. Thank you very much. What interests me is the fact that clay was readily available along the site of the canal. Did this in fact influence where the canal went to, so that they could guarantee that clay was available all the way along the site?
I tried to work this out, and I didn't find anything relating to that in the minutes, but I think it would have directed them where they took the route. I've got evidence where people built houses on a site because it had a bed of clay. They would take the clay out and use the hole to form the cellars of the house, and that's evident on several properties. And so I probably did his route, and then someone walked it again with the shovel and found good sources of clay as they went on. It was just quite a very practical, straightforward way of doing it. I think definitely that would be the case.
Of course, it was needed for puddling, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly.
Elizabeth. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm looking at the wrong screen.
Margaret as Jim. I wondered, Elizabeth, whether you'd come across any references to Strata Smith, because he was very much involved in the digging of canals all over the country. I mean, he died a pauper, but he was known as the father of geology. He apparently could look at the lie of the land and simply tell you what lay underneath. And he advised certainly on the building of some of the Midlands canals, and certainly further south. But I think he wasn't born until about 1740, something like that. I'm not good at dates. I'm no historian at all. I can't remember dates, names and figures. But I just wondered if you'd ever come across any references to him.
I have come across him more with regards to, as you say, geology than brickmaking. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of the records for this practical type of work just were not kept.
Yeah.
So if he did, he might have suggested, oh, this would be a good area to make your bricks. A bit like the John Green walking along the canal with the brickmaker did, I imagine. And they say about James Brindley, probably in the same way that Strata Smith could, he could read the land, and it was just a skill that he had. It was in him, rather than he could just, on a horse, he knew which way to take the canal, which way the canal needed to go, just by looking closely at the landscape, which I think some people still have that skill today. But it's done very differently, isn't it? But thank you for that comment.
Yeah, another point, just very briefly. One of my neighbours here in Lillington worked very briefly when he first left school, in between jobs, at the Lillington brickyard, and had graphic descriptions of heaving bricks out of the kilns when they were still warm and putting them on one of those flatbed carts, delivering them to a lorry and so on. Fascinating to talk to him.
It is. There's a chap in his 80s who lives near Walsall who worked taking bricks out the kiln, and they used to make out of inner tubes for off lorry tires, these little things that they'd make and put on their hands to
Yes.
protect their hands from burning, or the sharp edges of the bricks. And he's made some for me.
Really?
Yeah, he knew how to do it straight away. So he's put some for me so we can use them at the museum to
Fantastic.
demonstrate. So it was all still there, having done it 70 odd years ago. It's still
Yes.
in his, he must have made so many. So it's wonderful. It's been great doing oral histories with brickmakers.
Yes.
Yes. Because that it's just never been written down, the brickmaking element of itself, the science, the chemistry, all of that's written down, but the physical labor is just not there. So it's been really good to talk to people about that element of it.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I'm sure. Thank you.
Richard King.
Another point, that for anybody who's interested in the canals that are not in Black Country, the Stratford Canal was built, I think, about 1800, 1820 or whatever it was. And you will find in the local newspapers sale notices for millions of bricks that have been excavated and obviously were surplus to requirements being sold off in the adverts in the Stratford Herald and the Warwick Advertiser newspaper. But one interesting additional fact is that they were using plateways, railway lines to move the, and this is what, about 1820, railway tramways to move the bricks and so on. And they are being sold in the local paper. That's the Warwick Herald.
Thank you. Yeah, there was quite a trade for both brick surplus to requirements, but also second-hand bricks. Surprising how often second-hand bricks were advertised in the newspapers. So there was a reclaimed materials trade even back then, which makes a lot of sense. They were cheaper. They were still good bricks. They're still like today.
They've been used as hardcore, I expect.
Yeah.
They reckon that was all that the Lillington Brickworks was. Their products were fit for was hardcore.
Oh dear.
Our house is built of Lillington bricks.
But they were the early ones.
It's still standing.
No, not the bricks that are used in your house, but we're talking those in the early 60s, just prior to the folding up of the company. Rubbish.
George Rimmer. Oh,
George.
Margaret will never forgive you.
Margaret, you'll forgive me.
Hello, are we?
I shan't sleep tonight.
Sorry, I'm trying to get a word in.
It's okay. You'll be there in a moment, George. It's okay.
Yes.
I think we're okay.
Yeah, it's
George,
okay.
please.
That's me.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. I have to declare interest first of all because I was brought up in not in the Black Country but in the West Riding, where of course we used to use stuff called stone, which was far better than brick.
Oh yeah.
And you know, to me, canals are built with stone, not with bricks. But you still had, as was said a few minutes ago, you still, by Peter, you still had to puddle the clay to seal the canal. And you made quite a bit of comment about the amount of bricks required, millions of bricks and things. But it strikes me that there must have been a tremendous requirement for clay just to puddle the canal as well. So when you're talking about the supply of brick materials, presumably the puddling clay was just as important and just as important for people to find and locate. Is that have you any idea how much was needed? I mean, what
Gosh,
compare with the bricks or similar or less?
Millions of tons.
Not at all. I have to when I do my research, I easily go down rabbit holes all the time. So I have to just remain focused, particularly once the archives reopened. I had to just think, right, I need to stop. When you find something, you'll all know this, when you find something interesting, you then find something else. And before you know it, you spend 4 hours reading about something not at all relevant. So I'll put that onto my to-do list.
Nobody seems to have mentioned about the amount of coal that was required to burn the bricks.
Yeah, Black Country well served with coal.
Yeah, I think it's probably because the Black Country had so much of it, it wasn't really an issue.
No, but somebody had to dig out the coal, take it to the brickworks and so on. And what proportion was used per ton of bricks? Did you require 1 more or 10 tons of coal to burn the bricks, or what? No?
Oh, sorry. No, that's not something I've looked into.
Well, porcelain, if I can go to porcelain, the ratio is 10 tons of coal to 1 ton of clay, 1 ton of porcelain. So the ratio is 10 to 1 in that case.
Oh, you needed a lot of coal.
Exactly so.
Rex, did I see your hand raised?
You did, yes. I was interested in how bricks became standardised in sizes over the years. How did that occur? And
so it occurred. The government very early on, I think as early as the 16th century, started to control it, and they stipulated bricks have to be made so many inches by width, depth, height, and so on. And over time, things changed. Different areas had larger bricks, smaller bricks. And then in 1780, the government introduced a brick tax. And so for each brick that was made and came out of a kiln, there was a tax on it. So to get around this, certain brick makers started making really, really big bricks, and you call them statute bricks or tax bricks. I've never found many of them and in the Black Country. Whether there's any in Warwickshire, it would be interesting to know. I don't know the dimensions off the top of my head, but some of them that I've seen pictures on were real whoppers. The problem is that they're very difficult to lay. You can only lay about how many courses of them a day. Otherwise, the wall would just fall over from the pressure of the height, depth, the bricks and so on. So they weren't popular. And the brick tax ended in 1850. And they say this caused then a boom in brick making. But that's never been proven, because the benefit of the brick tax was that there's records from that period of brick production. Various manufacturers tried to get out of being taxed by hiding bricks. So there's all these funny stories of like women brick makers. The tax inspectors would turn up and they'd be asked, well, have you taken any bricks out the kiln today? And their boss had obviously said, you're not to tell them how many bricks we've made today. And the poor women, they're the ones that get in trouble rather than the brick makers themselves. So there's these court cases for these poor women who've tried to get away with making 2,000 bricks, but not declared them. So it was a big thing. So, yeah, I digressed, but...
John, do you want to follow up?
I just wanted to ask. I just want.
Oh, John.
You're on mute.
John, you need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I was just going to ask: is there any evidence available regarding payment to the men who actually fired the bricks? Did they get paid considerably more than just the brick workers themselves?
They definitely did. So the skilled skilled roles were considered the kiln men, firemen they were called, and they got paid even into the 1950s, 1960s. They got paid more than everyone else. There's a theory in the Black Country that the reason there were so many women brick makers was the men got paid much better working in iron and steel and all the other industries. They got paid better. Women were paid much less for brick making, but they could do it because it was, in some ways, they said women were more nimble fingered. They cared more about the product. There's all these theories. I think it was simply because they could pay women less, but women were still producing 1,500 bricks a day, like the men could. Whereas the men, they were seen as the skilled people, so they looked after the kilns or they worked elsewhere. It was children. Way until the 1870s, children were involved in the trade, and they were the clay getters. So they simply carried clay from one part of the brickworks, took it to the brick moulder, who was usually their older sister or older brother, and then carried the green brick to the drying room. So, and it was usually family led then. So the youngest was told, you know, you're 4 or 5 years old now, you need to come and work with us at the brickyard. But definitely the people that fired the kiln got paid the most. I think it would probably be the same today as well.
That's exactly the same as the porcelain industry.
Yeah.
The highest paid person was the person who looked after fired the kiln.
Because
it could destroy so much value.
If you throw a bad brick, it's not a problem. You just put it back in the brick mold and try again. If you've got how many 40,000 bricks in a kiln and you fall asleep, you've had it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Brian Ellis.
Yep. Can I just make a comment or two about the geology and availability of clay? In fact, the Midlands is virtually all clay of one form or another, so it's a ubiquitous material. As any of us who either farm or garden in this area know quite well, you're more likely to hit clay than anything else when you're digging. I mean, there are 2 lots which are bedrock clay, and that's associated with all the coal measures and the coal fields. And also very common is something called Mercia mudstone. And most of the Midlands has got is accessible to one or the other. But clay is also the product of weathering of other rocks. So whatever else you've got may well be weathering down to clay. So that produces almost certain you're not going to be very far from clay. And then the last bit of this is that the area has been glaciated, and one of the products of the glaciation has been clay. So out of all industries, brickmaking in the West Midlands and in general is not hampered by the shortage of raw materials. It's not like quarrying hard rock where there's only limited outcrops. So I don't think that's a big issue, really.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions or contributions?
Yeah, I'd just like to say something about wastage. When I was on holiday with my wife in South Africa, I gave her a special treat and took her to a brickworks in Bredasdorp, which had clamps, still use clamps. And it was a demanding, dirty activity. And what emerged was that actually 30% of each run was waste, either overcooked or undercooked. And this was perfectly accepted by the brickmaker, the boss. It was just part of the course. That it was so difficult to get the right level of heat for the appropriate firing, and so all these discarded bricks were all over the place. But it struck me. I mean, it was we were back to the 19th century, and this was, this is only a few years ago. So a fascinating trip, and I'd never seen FAMP in action, so that was a great joy for my wife as well, of course.
We believe you. We believe you.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that perhaps that's the time to hand back to Martin.
Right. Elizabeth didn't know this, but a lot of people do. I do. I was a brick collector for a long while. I recently deposited my bricks at a brick museum, and so it is a particular interest of mine. So it was a great pleasure to hear the talk tonight and to be reminded of the sheer scale of operations to produce the millions of bricks that were required, the temporary, seasonal, itinerant nature of the industry, and the range of people involved. Every schoolboy knows about Brindley, but all the other people that you mentioned that were part of the process are so important. And the few remaining buildings you showed us, we were at the bonded warehouse at Stourbridge very recently on a walk, actually connected with the glass industry, but few of us were there to see that, so that was good. Obviously, we are fascinated to see the brickworks at the Black Country Living Museum when it's up. We should be there and causing trouble by asking awkward questions. But no, it's a great venture. And if I could just make a plug for the Black Country Living Museum, it really is a great day out. It saved my grandparenting duties on a number of occasions recently. And I do recommend it. And there have been major changes to this new project, the Forging Ahead, of which Elizabeth is very much part. If I could just conclude, it was very interesting to hear you talk about the way in which you'd approached various your project, the various sources that you had, and the fact that it's an ongoing project which you'll never quite complete, but you have a deadline for your PhD presumably. And
yeah.
Seeing it possibly in public print, but I'm sure that it'll arouse more and more interest in the brickmaking in the Black Country, and we're very grateful to your talk this evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.